Chile's constitutional convention is advancing in the redrafting of the country's constitution, which will be put to a referendum later this year. Leaders of the 5 nuclear weapon states, namely China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom and the United States, on Monday issued a joint statement on preventing nuclear war and avoiding an arms race. The Iran nuclear talks resumed in Vienna on Monday after breaking for the New Year's holidays. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Chile, where the Constitutional Convention is advancing in the redrafting of the country's constitution, which will be put to a referendum later this year. Representatives of the convention have underlined the progress made in the past 6 months as they work to put an end to the Pinochet dictatorship-era constitution in a process that stemmed from mass protests against the prevailing neoliberal model in the country and calling for major social change. The proposal to redraft the constitution was approved in a referendum, and those responsible for the process include grassroots and progressive leaders, including from the country's indigenous Mapuche community. The recent election of Gabriel Boric as president, who has vowed to support the work of the convention, has been seen as a further sign of hope for a constitution that will tackle the major inequalities and violation of human rights in Chile. "62% of Chileans have a positive opinion of President-elect Gabriel Boric, according to a recent poll. Among sectors who identify as being of the left, the figure rises to 92%. Meanwhile, among those identifying as of the centre ground, the rate is 66% support and 54% among independents. However, only 31% of those on the right said they had a positive or very positive image of the next president, which is to be expected. The figures represent the highest approval rating Boric has ever received. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador Monday called on the United States to act in a humanitarian manner with the founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, who is imprisoned in the United Kingdom and facing extradition to the US on charges of espionage. In his daily morning conference, the president reiterated the offer of political asylum in Mexico for Assange and revealed that he even sent a letter asking for a pardon for the activist to Donald Trump before the end of his presidency. López Obrador highlighted Assange's ill health and urged the US authorities to consider an act of solidarity. A year ago, the Mexican president offered to host the journalist and activist who's fighting a legal battle to avoid extradition to the United States while being held in terrible conditions in a maximum security prison in the UK capital, which has been denounced as amounting to torture. The systematic violence continues in Colombia. This Sunday, the first massacre of 2022 was registered in the department of Arauca. The mayor of the municipality of Arauquita reported that 17 people had been confirmed dead in several areas of the department, with unofficial reports of as many as 20 deaths. The official stated that the deaths occurred in the midst of clashes between dissidents of the former Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia People's Army and the National Liberation Army. He also warned that hundreds of people are likely to be displaced by the violence. Meanwhile, a Colombian mother appealed to human rights organizations to find the whereabouts of her son, who was kidnapped from his home by an armed group in the town of La Paz in the department of Arauca.
Please help me with the whereabouts of my son. An armed group came to the house where he lives and took him away. So please help me find him. My son's name is Anderson Camacho Salcedo. He lives in the center of La Paz. An armed group arrived shooting, terrorizing the civilian population without knowing why, and they took my son away.
The government of Argentina upholds its legitimate claim to the Malvinas Islands on the 189th anniversary of their illegal occupation by the United Kingdom. The Malvinas, South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands and the surrounding maritime areas were illegally occupied by British forces on January 3, 1833. The Argentine government and people continue to claim their legitimate and sovereign rights over the islands, a claim supported by the United Nations and much of the international community. President Alberto Fernandez has reiterated the need for dialogue to reach a peaceful solution to the sovereignty dispute, according to a 1965 UN resolution. The anniversary saw the launch of the Malvinas 40 Years Agenda, a virtual platform offering documentary and audiovisual information on the occupation of the islands by Britain and the dispute. And we'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Leaders of the 5 nuclear weapon states, namely China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom and the United States, on Monday issued a joint statement on preventing nuclear war and avoiding an arms race. In a rare joint statement ahead of a review of a key nuclear treaty later this year, the 5 countries reaffirmed that none of their nuclear weapons would be targeted at each other or at any other state, and that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. They stated they consider it their primary responsibility to avoid war between the nuclear states and to reduce strategic risks, while aiming to work with all countries to create an atmosphere of security. China, which played an important role in facilitating the reaching of the positive and solid statement, welcomed the move and noted that it also helps the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council enhance mutual trust and replace competition with coordinated cooperation. Russia hopes the pledge will reduce world tensions, while noting that a summit of permanent UN Security Council members remains necessary. Heavy rains that have hit Brazil have already caused 25 deaths in the state of Bahia and another 6 in Minas Gerais. The intense rains started in early October in the north and central east of the country, but appear to be dying down. The most critical situation has been reported in Bahia, where 33,000 people are homeless, another 58,000 were displaced and 500 injured. 165 municipalities of the northern state have been affected, with 153 declared in an emergency situation. As for Minas Gerais, according to the Civil Defence, the rains have caused 6 deaths, left 3,000 people homeless and displaced another 13,000. And an NGO has launched a programme to support people affected by floods in the Brazilian state of Bahia. Rains have directly affected more than 600,000 people and more than 27,000 have lost their homes. In total, 165 municipalities, mostly impoverished communities, have been affected by the disaster, leaving many families with children exposed to hunger, disease and violence. With this initiative, the NGO SOS Children's Villages will offer safe spaces within shelters so that parents have a place to leave their children when they need to go out in search of support to rebuild their homes. Recreational and educational activities will be offered to help reduce the emotional harm that this type of disaster can cause in children, in addition to providing them with food and basic goods. At least 1 person was killed and thousands temporarily displaced by heavy floods that hit the Indonesian island of Sumatra. 4 days of heavy rains triggered floods in Aceh province, according to Indonesia's Disaster Mitigation Agency. Local administrations have declared a 14-day emergency and temporary shelters have been set up in different locations to accommodate those whose homes are underwater. Deadly landslides and flash floods are common in the Southeast Asian archipelago during the rainy season, which began in September. Thousands of people in Malaysia were forced to flee their homes due to increasingly severe flooding caused by torrential rains in 7 states. About 50 people have lost their lives in the floods, according to police sources. Over 125,000 people have already been displaced since mid-December. Malaysia suffers from flooding every year, which regularly generates mass evacuations. But the authorities were caught off guard by non-stop rains that began on December 17th, causing major flooding that inundated cities. Selangor, the country's richest and most densely populated state, which surrounds the capital Kuala Lumpur, is one of the worst affected regions. Some 117,000 people who were evacuated since mid-December have been able to return to their homes, but about 10,000 remain in shelters, according to official data. China's Central Weather Bureau reported a strong earthquake that struck off the coast of eastern Taiwan on Monday. The Weather Bureau said the 6.0 magnitude quake hit at a depth of 19 kilometres and was felt for about 20 seconds, with buildings shaking but with no damage reported. Taiwan's regularly hit by earthquakes as the island lies near the junction of 2 tectonic plates. Venezuela launched its booster vaccination campaign against COVID-19 this Monday. President Nicolás Maduro took to Twitter to announce a vaccination campaign and stressed the importance of receiving the booster shot. Maduro also reiterated that 91% of the population has already been vaccinated, while he called on his fellow citizens to continue taking care of themselves by observing all measures to stop the spread of the virus. The application of the booster shots will begin with health personnel, followed by the elderly and at-risk population. Syria received a donation of 1 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines and laboratory supplies from China. The Minister of Health informed that the doses of the Sinopharm vaccine, which has proven efficacy and effectiveness, and stressed that the donation is key to advancing the national vaccination campaign. As part of its cooperation with Syria, which continues to suffer terrorist attacks and foreign occupation, China donated 500,000 vaccine doses in November last year. Chile is to begin administering a second booster dose of vaccines against COVID-19. The Minister of Health confirmed on Sunday that the booster vaccination campaign will start this month. The shots will initially be targeted at the immunocompromised population, the elderly and health sector staff. The decision comes in the context of the sharp increase in cases worldwide due to the appearance of the Omicron variant. Chilean health authorities expect a sustained increase in the number of infections throughout the country, despite having one of the highest vaccination rates in the region.
We're going to start in January with the fourth dose, but always thinking about the people who have immunodeficiencies, who are older adults, probably people who work in the public health system or in the private health system, people who work in health.
Italy is just a few days away from the introduction of further restrictions for the unvaccinated on January 10th. Authorities have warned that the daily cases of COVID-19 are close to 100,000, sparking new restrictions to curb the spread of the virus. The decree approved by Prime Minister Mario Draghi establishes that capacity will be limited to 50% in outdoor public areas and 35% in indoor areas. As of January 10th, the government will extend the requirement to present a vaccination certificate for access to transportation, hotels and restaurants.
Green Pass for Green Pass. Done well, I do not understand how so many people have not yet been vaccinated in this country. And seeing the situation as it is now, and also the cases now in January after New Year's Eve, we also need to do something more. Perhaps everything has been set up wrong.
I don't think we can do without restrictions anymore. At this point, I am not saying that vaccination should be compulsory, but at least for work it is important that everyone should be vaccinated, not so much for the sake of greater safety, but precisely for the sake of protection.
Green Pass
And we have
for
more
Green-
stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The Iran nuclear talks resumed in Vienna on Monday after breaking for the New Year's holidays, with hopes that an agreement can be reached with world powers to revive the 2015 deal destroyed by the United States' unilateral withdrawal. Speaking at a briefing in Tehran, an Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson said this round of discussions towards reviving the 2015 nuclear deal with world powers would be more in-depth. He also confirmed Iran has been exchanging views and proposals with the United States unofficially and through the other negotiating parties. In recent days, Iranian officials have described negotiations as positive and expressed hope that reaching an agreement is becoming more feasible. However, Western nations have been less upbeat. Some officials close to the talks said the window to negotiate a return to the deal could close by the end of January or the beginning of February, although others claim that there is no fixed date. A spokesperson for the US State Department said Iran needed to add real urgency in Vienna. Thousands of Iraqis gathered on Sunday to pay tribute to two commanders assassinated on January 3, 2020 in a terrorist attack perpetrated by the United States. Iraqis gathered at Baghdad airport near the military installations of the United States occupation troops known as Victoria Base, where Major General Qasem Soleimani, commander of the Quds Force of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, the deputy chief of the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces, were killed in a US air raid. Those gathered lit candles and paid tribute to the heroes who led the fight against terrorism while condemning the ongoing US presence in Iraq.
We celebrate the second anniversary of the martyrdom of Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis Qasem Soleimani and their comrades near the Baghdad International Airport. In fact, this public and official presence near the scene of the crime is a message of protest to the United States of America that the Iraqis do not want their forces to remain inside Iraq.
The event was also attended by the daughter of the murdered Iranian Major General, who pointed out that the era of repression by US imperialism is coming to an end.
We are approaching the horizon of the severe revenge against the enemies whose hands were stained with the blood of the leaders of victory. It will not be long before the tears of farewell will turn into the tears of victory.
Demonstrations have been held in several Palestinian cities to demand the Israeli regime release Hasham Abu Awash, who has been on hunger strike for 139 days. The deteriorating health condition of Hawash, aged 40, has sparked multiple demonstrations and international reactions. The Palestinian prisoner began the hunger strike in rejection of his continued arbitrary detention in an Israeli jail without trial, a measure used by the Zionist regime against Palestinians to deprive them of their liberty over long periods of time. The International Committee of the Red Cross stated on Saturday that medical teams who had visited Hawash had found him in a critical condition and declared their concern about the irreversible consequences for his health and his possible tragic death.
Palestinian political prisoners are subject to horrible oppression by Israel. They are also subject to administrative detention, which means that people are arrested without even being charged, without knowing why they are arrested. Abu Hawash is one of them. He has been on hunger strike for 130 days and more, and his life is now threatened. He is on the verge of death. This could create a big explosion in the Palestinian territory.
Over 4,000 people died trying to reach Spain in 2021, according to an NGO which tracks data from boats in distress, representing the highest yearly number since the group started keeping records in 2015. In its latest report, the Caminando Fronteras migrants' rights group noted that the number of deaths represents an increase of over 100% compared to 2020, despite the fact that the official number of asylum seekers arriving in Spain by sea has remained practically the same. Over 94% of the victims disappear without their bodies ever being recovered, and in total 83 vessels completely disappeared with all those on board in 2021. As people risk their lives to reach European shores fleeing conflict and poverty, EU member states continue their anti-immigrant rhetoric and ignore their plight. Now we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss and thank you for watching.